Hello, I'm Sparsh. This is Isha. First of all, let me say how excited and very grateful we are that we are sharing the stage with some of the brightest minds here and that we have all of your attention for the next 25 minutes to talk about something that we had a lot of fun doing, researching video games. It was like some of the best fun we've had as user researchers. But yeah, today's talk is going to be about we're going to present a little story from our time researching games. We're going to talk about how we solved for retention in one of the games at Gameberry Labs by thinking like a game designer. We'll tell you a little bit about how, give you a sneak peek on how games user research is different from a typical UX research practice. And we will also give you a little bit, maybe a framework that we use to solve for retention in gaming. And hopefully you can use it for your own work as well. But I think the first part is for us to convince you why should you listen to two people who research games. Um, I mean, the only thing I have to convince you is of how competitive that industry is, right? So 12 to 14% of all apps are just games across both stores. 41% of all downloads are also games. Single largest category, both in terms of volume as well as download volume, games. So much choice, you are probably not making something new. And out of that, only 1.7% is the total D30 retention rate. And even when you're talking about free-to-play games, which we work in, where you don't really have to pay to download and play a game, 3% people actually pay. So what basically you have to understand is that this is a fairly common thing for a lot of game studios and a lot of games that end up happening, right? For us, when people come in, it's really important for us to keep their attention on the game. One of the ways we do that for games is stories. And we're going to talk about how we measured the immersion in a story that leads to retention. Do you guys remember this game? Snake! Yes! So I want to give you a little intuitive understanding of what this is, right? At the bare bones of it, Snake is just a line that goes around a screen and it kind of keeps on increasing and you don't have to hit it, right? But we call it Snake and you suddenly have a metaphor in your head. Take Snake 3. Slightly more polished right now. There is a character to the game. There is an apple and a snake, if somebody got the reference. But you see, this entirety of the metaphor being painted over actually adds a lot more layer of interactivity to the game, right? You recognize this one? Yes, it's Candy Crush, right? At the end of it, what is it, right? It's a match three shapes together, but we call it crushing candies. Right? You have characters that take you through the journey, and as you play, there is an entire level. What you're doing actually the same thing over and over again. But what's happening is that you end up feeling like you're on a journey, and that's what keeps people coming back. So, when we were working on this game, it's called Draw Match Kingdom. It's similar. You'll see the mechanics are similar to Uno. You have to match the card to the color or the number below, and it's set in this world of pips. You see that character on the top? With the little, almost Bulbasaur-like. Yeah, and I think so that was one of those things, right? So in the early stages of this game's development, the team came to us with one simple question. We call those characters pips, and does the world of pips give players a reason to keep coming back? Now this is important as a question is because it's easy to copy the mechanic. 41% downloads of all things, right? So what differentiates the game? Maybe the world, right? And they asked us that, hey, among other things, hey, does the story work? We were like, yeah, we'll look at what the character relatability is, what the plot hooks are like, is there cultural relevance to what we're talking? And that's when we realized it doesn't really work. We did it for a couple of days and we realized that games are not your typical storytelling devices. You don't have a captive audience. It's not a movie, right? Your session time, and this we are talking about free-to-play games. There are games which are very story-driven, so differentiation is important. The session time is 4 to 10 minutes. You have to deliver the game. You don't have time to really have a cutscene or a long paragraph explaining what the characters are doing. These are also very functional in these games because they are not really meant for you to experience the story. They are meant for you to keep coming back. And you also have to put in the effort to go through the story. It's not passive. You cannot watch it. You have to put in the effort to do it. So by just looking at character relatability and cultural relevance, we realize that we are missing out on all of these aspects. And most importantly, is it doing retention or not? Right? So we needed something which could actually account for these. And because we were in a game development studio, we thought, what if we looked at the story of a game like a game in itself? So back in 2004, there was a framework called Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics, which breaks down a game into 3 key components. What are the rules that form a game? What is the emergent player behavior? By emergent, I mean something which is, have you ever hidden cards under your leg when you're playing Uno? Yeah, it's an emergent behavior. It comes out of because of the rules of the game. It's not something that's coded into it. And finally, the emotional experience. So as a game designer, as a studio, we write the rules that shape the behavior that lead to an experience, but the players experience it on the opposite direction. And we have to sort of keep this in mind as we're building it, right? We're gonna skip these terms for the presentation for the sake of keeping it light and less jargony. But yeah, there is a reference there. So how did we use this to sort of structure a much more rounded research inquiry into retention? Isha will walk us through that.
Thanks, Sparsh.
Yes.
So narratives in Draw Match Kingdom, much like any free-to-play games, are broken down into pieces. So imagine a puzzle that you're building where a player has to earn to progress. So the premise is simple. You are upcycling trash objects to create a beautiful home for the pips. And a building mechanic, which is a story, is very common in a lot of free-to-play games. And when you look at upcycling something, was very different and intuitive for the team to pick up and do. So here, it was very important for us to check the immersion of the experience beyond, is this fun, to actually segregate them into rules, behavior, and emotion. Now, what are the rules here? You complete levels, you earn stars, and players need to earn a certain number of stars to complete the scene. So it was very important to isolate the rule from the experience so that you are able to understand the cognitive and emotional investment of the narrative for players. So it was very important to ask, is the effort to collect stars over multiple levels balanced by the gratification provided through the narrative content? So it's not about you look at a scene and you're like, wow, this is amazing, but then you play this game over 50 levels, and then when a similar scene like this pops up, do you still feel gratified? Now, when we look at the emergent behavior, so we'll just watch the video. So this is how the home looks like, pretty much. Yeah, so essentially after the scene is presented to you, players are supposed to go back, play levels, with anticipation for the new scene to unfold. So this forms the primary retention cycle. This could be in the same session or over multiple sessions. Now, it was important for us to understand if the narrative acts as a reason to return even after the novelty of the core game wears off, because the game, like Sparsh said, it's just match color, match number cards, right? And when you look at the emotion, right, as players play through multiple levels, and when the scene is presented to them, they should ideally feel gratified for the effort that they put in. And there's also this character, this is Pip, where essentially players should feel relatable to the character, and we also wanted to understand if the journey, which is the narrative, gives player a sense of purpose and meaning. So overall, we wanted to sort of, these are the research questions that we sort of asked, overarching ones, but we wanted to ideally understand what was delivered, when was it delivered, and what did it feel like for the players when it actually came in as an experience. Now, how did we evaluate this? So, before we move to that, what we did was playtesting, which is very similar to usability testing. But however, in gaming studios, right, playtesting is often a process where a lot of people from product, design, QA, they all come together and they call out bugs and issues in animation, etc. But for the first time in Gameberry Labs, we wanted to do something different. We wanted to show the team stakeholders how a player would actually play the game in the environment of what they built. So what we did was we replicated a typical environment where a free-to-play gamer would play to de-stress. So we created a very comfortable environment. We kept cameras right behind the player with, of course, we sort of told them how that these cameras would be there, and we observed cues like vocalizations, facial expressions, etc. And what we also did was that we mirrored a live experience to the team who built the game. So game designers, for example, they were able to see how players were struggling to sort of make combinations in a level or even complete a level, which the designers thought would have been much, much more easy for a generic player to do. So when we said we analyzed emotional cues, right? What we sort of looked at was we measured the entire experience through multiple touch points. We looked for data channels, which would be the body language, room cam, or the behavioral screen interactions. We would see if, let's say, when the narrative comes into the player, would Are they reacting? Do they exclaim, oh, or it's cute, or do they not react at all? Or at what point of the experience does that behavior shift? Are players still attentive? Do they lean in, looking for anticipation for the narrative to come in, or are they just blind tapping, treating the narrative as a chore just to play levels? So these emotional cues were coded for us to sort of analyze and see how this was coming in over a game session for about 30 minutes or so. Now, it was also important for us to see if the narrative had cultural context. So what we also did was we tested it with the target group. This game was specifically made for the US. So here, we could not replicate the environment, but what we ended up doing was that we made players speak out loud as they play so as to capture these cues. Now, this is the part where we talk about the revelations. Let's see what a 50-plus level audit gave us. Now, looking at the rules, what were the rules? You play a level, you earn stars, you earn a certain number of stars to complete a scene. Now, imagine these apples are scenes that comes up across different touch points of levels. So you can see the first one comes at level 1, and the second one comes at level 7, and then 17. And let's also remember the difficulty curve of the level rises up as you play. So we created an emotional mapping across 50 levels, and what ended up happening was that across the first few levels, right, there was this narrative spark. People loved the character when it was presented to them, and they were exciting to see how the story unfolds. However, as they kept playing, right, it was almost like they had to wait for that story to come in, and they were sort of confused. The effort to reward gap sort of stayed flat, and players were like, why am I putting so much effort for just a renovation in the building? And that sort of created burnout, where they started playing even more levels to at least feel like the final scene complete or the narrative complete would give them the gratification that they expected. However, the reward felt too small to justify the grind, and they were extremely disappointed. Oops. And talking about the emotion, when the character was presented to them, right, more than just calling them Pip, players immediately felt so emotional towards it. They would call it they created names for Pip, basically. They would call it a turnip person, or little dandelion character, or even the sprout guy, or a little buddy to play with. So this was a win, right? There was relatability, people were loving the character and whatnot. But however, what ended up happening was that players loved the character so much that the narrative did not give enough of Pip in the experience, that players felt like they adopted a pet, but they did not just know what to do with it. One verbatim haunted us where it said, I didn't feel like there was a storyline. I need to feel like I'm helping this character. So when we promise that you're helping to build the world for Pips, when you see there are incremental renovations in the narrative, and when they were not able to see the character enough, that sort of fell flat. Now, talking about the behavior, now this would again go in multiple stages. So when a player plays a free-to-play game for the first time, right? So that's called the onboarding. What ends up happening is that they expect the game to pitch to themselves as to why they should choose to play this over any other games. So initially, there was character relatability. Players loved Pips. They were expecting a whole world to unfold in front of them. But what ended up happening is that as they kept playing on levels, and when they realized that they had to play so many levels to just see a small renovation change in the narrative, they started evaluating. They go into this evaluation stage where, okay, why would I play this over all the other games that I have on my app or that's there on the store? And then what ends up happening is that this behavior of, okay, now I've played so many levels, comes into the state of sunk cost momentum, where they're like, okay, I'm here, let me just play as much as I can as until the session ends. And then it went into a state of reconsideration because the narrative was paced out so much, and there was no relatable. They were not able to build a relationship with the character. They ended up in the state of reconsideration. Now, to summarize, these were the 3 points. The gratification was spaced out too far apart. The narrative was repetitive beyond the first session. Like I said, they were just incremental renovations to a building. And players wanted to care for the Pip, but the game didn't let them. So what did we do? We know that players loved Pip. They want to explore or traverse or what do I say? They wanted to see more of the character in the game, and they also want some sort of variety in the narrative, which would make them feel like there is anticipation to play more levels and see what unfolds. So this was the narrative that was previously there, and what we ended up doing was that we created a storyline for Pips where there is variety. So for example, this is Cake Day. This would be a scene of a narrative where Pip and his friends are baking, and then they are going to a friend's party and they're having fun. So again, these scenes are varied. It would also make a player feel like they're watching a favorite episode of their TV show. I mean, something like that. And these stories would also keep changing, which would build more anticipation or variety as to someone who would not expect what would come next. So now to talk about spacing, Sparsh, why don't you take over?
Okay. So yes, please pass me on. All right, wait. Trust me. Okay, one more interestingly made graph for you guys, completely unstatistical, but you recall this from our thing, right? All the different stages. Now we are working on retention like we already said, right? So just to give you an idea of what's happening, I'll draw an imaginary line somewhere, says uninstall threshold somewhere, right? I'm gonna say that, okay, the engagement on the game, and you can measure it through however we want. We had our own metric of measuring it. If it falls below this, they'll probably uninstall the game, and they'll either continue with a game that they already have on their phone or find something new, right? And we already saw that one, because they are all apples, the gratification is more or less the same, and it's fairly spaced out. So this is what we essentially did, right? Two things. One, the spacing was reduced, right? So we kind of managed to keep the effort in a place where it doesn't become too difficult that you give up on the story, but it's just challenging enough that you're looking forward to what's happening next. And by moving to a more episodic sort of a narrative, as we have described through different fruits instead of a apple, what we are doing is we are building anticipation. So instead of that one incremental thing, every new panel that is revealed in the story adds diversity to what's going to happen next, instead of thinking that, hey, there's going to be another story on top of a boot, right? So did it work? Yes. Within experimental parameters, we did manage to increase retention, at least for people who are coming in for the story, right? So what we learned from this, and these are like things that maybe you can take, that you can also try, right? One is that the 3 pillars of a retention strategy are just not the reward. You have to work through the effort as well as look at the user behavior that's coming out of that retention strategy, right? The other thing that also comes is loyalty did not build with a bigger reward. In our initial stages, we thought that, hey, we're going to give an even grander reveal of the final thing. A lot of people think that, hey, retention isn't working, so let me give a bigger reward at the end of it. That doesn't kind of work that way. It has to build with the journey that is required to get you there, right? And finally, predictable rewards become undervalued over time, right? Imagine your Swiggy One discount. After a point in time, I'm not sure how many of you notice it, or the class teacher who always gives you a star. Whatever you do you value their star as much as somebody else's, right? So that's sort of the idea. For us, it was nice, right? We did it, we made the sense. The game is still on the Play Store, you can play it if you want. But there's more, right? Because we are in a group of researchers, and in the interest of teaching a person how to fish, instead of feeding them, we're going to tell you about what you can do with your own retention mechanic. So, and that can also be a loyalty mechanic. Are we familiar with snap streaks? Yeah, they are there in Snapchat. They're also there in a lot of other things. So if we have to use that rules, behaviors, and emotions framework, this is how it will kind of look like. What's your rule? A 24-hour timer? There's no way you can do it. There might be extensions or whatnot, right? What is your behavior that emerges out of it? Your photos almost end up being in the moment captures. They are not as polished because you don't have the opportunity to polish them as much. And your emotion that is experienced is sort of a visual social proof that, hey, you are very close to this person on social media, right? Now, once you are able to break down a retention mechanic into these 3 stages, you actually have a better way to write research questions. when you're evaluating it. So as a rules, maybe you can ask that, hey, is the rule too easy or is it too difficult? We want it to be challenging. The second thing is the rule easy enough to understand, right? Your 15 tiers of a retention mechanic will probably not, be too much for somebody to keep in your head. When you're looking at behavior, while you're looking at, hey, are people doing what we intend them because of the retention mechanic, you also have to look at what are the side effects. For example, in this case, because you're forcing in the moment captures, it's probably not great place for all sorts of influencers or a professional photographer to be there because they want to have that polish in what they're putting out there. So keep in mind what will be the side effects of a retention mechanic. And finally, the emotion. And I think it's the most simple as well as the most tricky to kind of figure out. Does the emotional experience merit an encore? Do people want to come back to what they got at the end of your journey, right? So yeah, that's sort of it for us. I hope you guys had like something to take away from our learnings. We had a lot of fun doing it, and thank you for the time. Yeah.
Where the curation of the gameplay is done so thoughtfully. May I now invite Ankur Sardana to present Sparsh and Isha with a token of appreciation. Does anybody have a quick question for Sparsh and Isha? Yes. Do you want to go? There's one.
Presentation was really interesting. I want to ask somebody who works at the private sector as well. I understand the capitalistic view of trying to get as much gamification out of your game. I want to flip it and ask, when does gamification becomes too much, and how do you guys identify that? What are the ways you try to identify that? Yes, this is a point where gratification is enough. Now we need to maybe tone that down. I want to understand that because there are games that become too addictive to people, and sometimes that has negative repercussions in terms of how people look at the game as well. Yeah.
Shit, they caught us. No, it's a very valid question. I think, and Navita is sitting in the audience. I think I've asked her a couple of times. She was my manager. She manages Isha, about how do we balance this sort of thing where we want to make a lot of money, but we at the same time kind of want to keep it at a place where we are not causing harm to the person, right? I think the way we ended up making peace with it is the fact that, well, among the multitudes of the way of games that are out there, this is one of the how would I put it? It's not real money gaming. The risk of addiction is substantially lower. I'm not saying that it's not there. Those are like really important things. But the question that you have also asked is actually something which the gaming industry is dealing with right now. What we try to do at Gameberry is to, of course we have to run a business, but what we try to balance it is with a good experience that people get at the end of it. We also look at the positives, games and all the social features within them actually give people a lot of opportunity to connect to people over time. That's actually how one of our most best successes in gaming happened. So there are positives to it as well. I think it comes down to the kind of game studio that you're working with, the kind of people that you're working with. We were lucky to have people who weren't thinking of it in a predatory sense. They still don't. That's a very amazing team that's out there. So yeah, not all is bleak, but it certainly is something that we look out for. I hope that answers.
Just one small follow-up. In terms of cultural immersions, do you guys look at societal culture as well when you're building games?
That's your question.
So yes, we do. So we also look at affluent versus non-affluent cohorts. We look at what are the underlying behaviors and why would they use gaming to cover those underlying behaviors, and how could we in a positive way use those as opportunities. That's it. So to give you a fair example, we did a similar study for exploring cultural contexts in MENA region where privacy is very, very important to them. So how do we ensure that in our games that we, even as the smallest feature, how do we ensure there's enough privacy for players to come in and play safely, or even those underlying behaviors that we identified for which they use gaming for? How do we ensure that they are safe and play? So those are things that we try to sort of understand. Yeah, although I may not be able to sort of share as much, but yeah, this is what it is.
Let's keep